Rejected mail-order bride, until the cowboy's son whispered, "Please stay, Mama." The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Dalton's Creek, and Margaret Winters knew before her boots touched the dirt that she'd made a terrible mistake. Through the dust-smeared window she could see him, the man who'd sent for her, standing rigid as a fence post with his arms crossed, his mouth pressed into a line so thin it could have cut leather. He looked at her the way a rancher might size up a lame horse at auction, and something cold settled in her chest. She stepped down anyway, gripping her worn carpetbag like it might anchor her to something solid. The afternoon sun beat down on her shoulders, turning the back of her navy travel dress into a furnace. Around them, the town hummed with ordinary life. A blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil, women in faded calico moved between storefronts, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular. "You're older than I expected." His voice came flat, without greeting or pretense. Margaret's fingers tightened on the bag's handle. She was 28, not some spring chicken, but she'd been honest in her letters. "I'm Margaret Winters, you'd be Daniel Hartley." "I am." He didn't offer his hand. Behind him, the general store's porch cast a shadow that didn't quite reach where they stood. "Look, I'll be straight with you. I was expecting someone younger, someone who could manage a household and help with ranch work without needing to rest every few hours." Heat crawled up her neck that had nothing to do with the Montana sun. She'd traveled 3 weeks to get here, spent the last of her savings on the train fare, left behind the only home she'd known after her father's death. The boarding house where she'd been staying had needed her room for a paying tenant. There was nothing to go back to. "I can work as hard as any woman half my age," she said, hatting how her voice wavered. "I've run a household since I was 15. Daniel's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. "I'm sure you have, but I've got a ranch that needs a firm hand and a boy who needs a mother who can keep up with him. I don't think this is going to work out." The words hit her like a physical blow. Around them, she could feel eyes turning their direction, the old men on the bench outside the mercantile, a woman pausing with her shopping basket, a young cowhand pretending to adjust his saddle while he watched. Small towns were all the same that way. By supper, everyone would know Daniel Hartley had rejected his mail-order bride before she'd even set foot in his house. "You could at least give me a chance." She straightened her spine, meeting his eyes even though shame burned in her throat. "1 week. If I can't manage, I'll leave without complaint." He looked away first, his gaze sliding past her to the mountains that rose in the distance like jagged teeth. "I can't afford to waste time on maybes. I need someone I can count on." "Then you should have been clearer in your letters." The anger surprised her, cutting through the humiliation. "You told me you needed a capable woman who could read and write, who knew how to manage a home. You didn't mention you wanted someone barely out of girlhood." A muscle jumped in his cheek. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, but he just shook his head. "I'll pay for a room at the boarding house for tonight. Tomorrow's stage can take you back to Denver." He turned and walked away, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. Margaret stood there, her carpetbag growing heavier by the second, watching him disappear around the corner past the saddlery. The afternoon heat pressed down on her like a weight, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 4 times. She'd never felt more alone in her life. The boarding house sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story building with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. The proprietress, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Coulter, took Margaret's money without comment, but her expression said plenty. By the time Margaret reached her cramped room on the 2nd floor, her hands were shaking. She set the carpetbag on the narrow bed and walked to the window. Below, the town continued its evening routine. A wagon rolled past loaded with hay. 2 men argued outside the saloon. A woman herded 3 children toward home, their voices carrying up in high, clear notes. Normal life, going on like her world hadn't just collapsed. Margaret pressed her forehead against the warm glass and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she dried her eyes, unpinned her traveling hat, and tried to figure out what came next. She had $17 to her name, not enough to start over somewhere else, barely enough to eat for a month if she was careful. The stage ticket back to Denver would take most of it, and then what? She had no family, no prospects. Her father's debts had swallowed everything when he died. Coming west had been her last desperate gamble. A knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find a boy standing in the hallway, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair that stuck up in back and eyes the same storm cloud grey as Daniel Hartley's. He wore patched trousers and a shirt with one button missing. "Are you the lady who came to marry my pa?" His voice held simple curiosity, no judgment. Margaret's throat went tight. "I suppose I was meant to be." "Why aren't you at the ranch then?" He tilted his head, studying her with the directness only children could manage. "Your father changed his mind." The words came out steadier than she expected. "He decided I wasn't suitable." The boy's face fell. "Because you're old." Despite everything, a laugh caught in her chest. "I'm not old, I'm just not young enough for him, I guess." "That's stupid." He scuffed one boot against the floorboard. "My ma died when I was 4. I don't remember her much, except she smelled like bread and she sang real pretty. Pa says I need a new ma because I'm getting wild, but none of the town ladies want to marry him because he's too gruff and the ranch is too far out." Margaret leaned against the doorframe, studying this small person who'd appeared like some kind of dusty angel. "What's your name?" Thomas James Hartley, but everyone calls me Tommy." He looked up at her with those serious grey eyes. "What's yours?" "Margaret Winters. You can call me Miss Margaret if you like." "Can you cook, Miss Margaret?" The question surprised her. "Yes, quite well, actually." "Can you read stories?" "I can." "Can you sew up torn knees?" He pointed to a poorly mended patch on his trousers. "Better than whoever did that job, certainly." Tommy's face brightened. "Then why doesn't Pa want you? That's all the stuff a ma needs to do, isn't it?" Before Margaret could answer, heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Daniel Hartley appeared. His expression thunderous when he spotted his son. "Tommy, I told you to wait in the wagon." "I wanted to meet her proper." The boy didn't look scared, just defiant in the way children get when they know they're right. "You didn't even bring her home to see if she'd fit." "That's not your concern." Daniel's voice carried a warning, but Margaret noticed the way his hand settled gentle on his son's shoulder. "Come on, we've got evening chores." "I don't want to go home." Tommy crossed his arms. "It's lonely there, and you're mean." Something flickered across Daniel's face, hurt maybe, or guilt. "We talked about this. Go on now." Tommy looked back at Margaret, his expression so hopeful it cracked something in her chest. Then he trudged down the stairs, his small boots heavy on each step. Daniel lingered, his jaw working again like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he just nodded once and followed his son. Margaret closed the door and leaned against it, listening to their footsteps fade. She didn't sleep well that night. The mattress was lumpy, and through the thin walls she could hear Mrs. Coulter's clock chiming every hour. Around midnight, she gave up and moved to the window, watching moonlight turn Main Street silver. Somewhere out there, beyond the town's edge, Daniel and Tommy were sleeping in their lonely ranch house. The image wouldn't leave her alone. By dawn, she'd made a decision that was probably foolish, but felt inevitable as sunrise. She used most of her remaining money to rent a horse from the livery, a placid mare named Bess who looked half asleep. The stable hand gave her directions to the Hartley ranch, warning her it was a good hour's ride. Margaret thanked him and set out, her body protesting every bounce and jostle. She'd never been much of a rider. The ranch sat in a valley between two ridges, accessible by a rutted road that tested Bess's patience. The house was a low-slung structure of weathered wood with a stone chimney, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings that needed paint. Chickens pecked in the yard, and 3 horses watched from a fenced pasture. Clothes hung on a line, flapping in the morning breeze, shirts and trousers that spoke of masculine hands doing their own washing. Daniel emerged from the barn as she rode up, his face going from surprise to wary in the space of a heartbeat. "Miss Winters, what are you doing here?" Margaret climbed down from Bess with less grace than she would have liked, her legs stiff. "I came to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in." "Just listen." She straightened her skirt, trying to look more confident than she felt. Give me 2 weeks. Let me work here, keep house, cook, help with Tommy. If I can't manage, if I slow you down or cause problems, I'll leave without complaint and I won't ask for anything. But if I prove myself, you'll honor your commitment and marry me." He stared at her like she'd sprouted horns. "That's crazy." "It's practical." She pulled off her gloves, meeting his eyes directly. "You need help. I need a home. 2 weeks is barely any time at all, and you'll know for certain whether this can work. What do you have to lose?" "My sanity, for starters." But something shifted in his expression. Calculation, maybe, or desperation. "Why would you even want to stay after yesterday? Most women would have left on the next stage just to spite me." Margaret thought about her $17, about the emptiness waiting back east, about Tommy's hopeful face. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go, and because you were honest, even if you were cruel about it, I'd rather know where I stand." Daniel's gaze swept over her, assessing. In the morning light, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, lines around his eyes, shadows beneath them. His hands were work-roughened, his shirt patched at the elbows. Whatever else he was a man holding everything together through sheer stubbornness. "2 weeks," he said finally, "but you sleep in the spare room and there's no promises. If this doesn't work, you leave quietly." Relief hit her so hard she almost swayed. "Agreed." "And you pull your weight. I don't have time to coddle anyone." "I wouldn't expect you to." He nodded once sharp. "Tommy's inside. He'll be over the moon, which means I'm probably going to regret this." He took Bess's reins. "Go on in. I'll put your horse up." The house smelled like cold ash and bacon grease. The front room held mismatched furniture and a braided rug worn thin in the center. Dishes were stacked in a wash basin and dust coated every surface. Through a doorway, she could see a kitchen with a cast-iron stove and shelves that needed organizing. Tommy appeared from a back hallway, his face lighting up like Christmas morning. "Miss Margaret, you came." "I'm going to stay for a little while," she said carefully. "Help your father out around here." "Are you gonna be my ma?" The question came eager, unguarded. "We'll see. First, I need to prove I can manage things." She looked around the cluttered room. "Think you could help me clean up this place?" "I guess." He didn't sound enthusiastic, but he fetched a broom without complaint. They spent the morning putting the house to rights. Margaret scrubbed floors and beat rugs while Tommy carried water and swept. She found evidence of Daniel's attempts at housekeeping, mismatched dishes stacked haphazardly, shirts with crooked mending, a pot with something burned to the bottom that might have once been stew. The man clearly tried, but there were only so many hours in a day when you were running a ranch alone. By noon, the place looked almost civilized. Margaret assembled a meal from what she found in the larder: beans, salt pork, cornbread. Not fancy, but hot and filling. When Daniel came in for dinner, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the clean room and set table. "You work fast," he said. "I'm motivated." Margaret dished out food, trying not to feel too pleased by his surprise. "Sit down before it gets cold." Tommy talked through the whole meal, a steady stream of commentary about his pa's horses and the calf born last week and the hawk he'd seen that morning. Daniel mostly listened, but Margaret caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. She couldn't read his expression. After dinner, he stood. "I've got work to do. Tommy, you help Miss Margaret with whatever she needs." "Yes, sir." Tommy jumped up, already reaching for dirty plates. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Margaret tackled the mending pile, her needle flying through tears and loose buttons, while Tommy did his lessons at the kitchen table. The boy read haltingly from a worn primer, stumbling over words. She helped when he got stuck, praised him when he got things right. His eager smile reminded her of why she'd answered Daniel's advertisement in the first place. It wasn't just about needing a home. It was about being needed. At supper, she made potato soup and biscuits. Daniel ate 3 bowls without comment, and Tommy scraped his plate clean. When she stood to clear the table, Daniel surprised her by helping. They worked in silence, the only sounds the clink of dishes and water splashing. "You did good today," he said finally, not looking at her. "Thank you. Tommy seems taken with you. He's a sweet boy." Daniel's hands stilled in the wash basin. He gets attached too easy. I don't want him hurt when this doesn't work out. The words strung, but Margaret kept her voice level. Then maybe you should give this a real chance instead of expecting it to fail. He looked at her then, something complicated moving behind his eyes. You don't know what you're signing up for. This life is hard. Winter's brutal out here, and we're a long way from town. It's lonely and cold, and the work never stops. I know what loneliness feels like, Margaret said quietly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Yeah, his voice softened slightly. What made you answer my advertisement? Real reason. She considered lying, making herself sound more romantic or desperate, but he'd been honest with her in his blunt way. My father died owing money we didn't have. I worked at a boarding house in Philadelphia, but it barely paid enough to eat. I'm educated, but that doesn't mean much when you're a woman with no family and no prospects. Coming west seemed like the only way to have any kind of future. Daniel dried his hands on a towel, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry about your father. Me too, she turned back to the dishes. What about you? Why send for a bride instead of courting someone local? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I did try, but women around here, they see a widower with a kid and a struggling ranch, and they want no part of it. Can't say I blame them. He hung the towel up. My wife, Sarah, she was born to this life, knew how to rope and ride before she could write her name. I guess I thought I needed someone like that again. But you don't think I can measure up? I think you're trying real hard, and I appreciate that, but trying and doing are different things. He moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder. He was right. The next day she learned just how relentless ranch life could be. Chickens needed feeding at dawn, eggs collecting, water hauling, meals cooking, clothes washing, floors sweeping, garden weeding. Her hands blistered from the pump handle, her back ached from bending, her arms trembled from carrying heavy pots. By evening, she was ready to collapse. But she didn't. She made supper, helped Tommy with his reading, mended another shirt. When Daniel came in smelling like horse and hay, she had coffee ready and food on the table. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. The days fell into a pattern. Margaret woke before sunrise, worked until her body screamed for rest, fell into bed after dark. She learned which hens were broody, how to coax the stove to just the right temperature, where Daniel kept his tools. Tommy shadowed her constantly, chattering and helping in his 7-year-old way. The boy was starved for attention, for gentle hands and patient words. Daniel remained distant but not unkind. He thanked her for meals, noticed when she repaired something, corrected her when she did things wrong. The ranch was his whole world, and she could see him slowly accepting her presence in it. Sometimes she caught him watching her while she worked, his expression almost soft. Then he'd remember himself and look away. 10 days in, everything changed. A storm rolled in from the mountains, turning afternoon into twilight. Thunder cracked like rifle shots, and rain fell in sheets that turned the yard to mud. Margaret was in the kitchen when she heard Tommy scream. She ran outside without thinking, rain soaking her in seconds. Tommy was in the pasture, trying to calm Daniel's prize mare who'd spooked at the thunder. The horse reared, hooves flashing, and the boy stumbled backward, falling hard. Margaret's heart stopped. She climbed the fence, her skirts tangling, and ran toward Tommy. The mare bolted past her, nearly knocking her down. She reached the boy and pulled him close, checking for injuries. His arm hung at an odd angle, and his face had gone white with pain. "It's okay," she gasped, rain plastering her hair to her face. "You're okay, we're going to get you inside." Daniel appeared out of nowhere, his face stark with terror. He scooped Tommy up, cradling him against his chest, and ran for the house. Margaret followed, her whole body shaking, with cold, with fear, with adrenaline. Inside, they laid Tommy on the kitchen table. His arm was definitely broken, the bone not piercing skin, but the angle all wrong. The boy cried silently, tears streaming down his cheeks, trying to be brave. Daniel's hands shook as he touched his son's face. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said. "No time," Margaret forced her voice steady. "I've set bones before. My father broke his arm twice, and the doctor showed me how." Daniel stared at her. "You sure?" No, but it needs doing now. He held Tommy while she worked, speaking softly to the boy, distracting him with stories. Margaret's hands moved with careful precision, feeling for the break, manipulating the bone back into alignment. Tommy screamed once, a sound that tore through her, and then it was done. She splintered the arm with wooden slats and torn sheets, binding it snugly. There, she whispered, brushing sweaty hair from Tommy's forehead. Brave boy, so brave. Tommy's eyes were glazed with pain, but he managed a small smile. You didn't leave. Of course not, her throat closed up. I'd never leave you. Daniel carried his son to bed, staying with him until the boy drifted into exhausted sleep. When he emerged, Margaret was still at the kitchen table, her wet dress clinging to her hands finally trembling with reaction. He sat down across from her. Thank you. I just did what needed doing. You could have been killed. That horse was crazed. Margaret looked at him, seeing fear still etched in every line of his face. He's your son, how could I not? Something broke in Daniel's expression. He reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. I was wrong about you, so damn wrong. I told you I could manage. It's not about managing. His voice came rough, raw. You threw yourself in front of a terrified horse for a boy who isn't even yours yet. Sarah would have done the same. I thought I needed someone like her, but what I needed was someone who'd love him like she did. His fingers tightened on hers. If you'll still have me, I'd be honored to marry you, not because I need help around the ranch, but because you belong here, with us. Margaret's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back for days. Are you sure, you said? I was a fool. He stood, pulling her up with him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. These past 10 days, watching you work yourself raw, seeing you with Tommy, the way you've made this house a home again, I should have been on my knees thanking God you came, not looking for reasons to send you away. I'm not young, she whispered. I'm not like Sarah. No, he agreed. You're Margaret. You're steady and strong and kind, and my son is already calling you Mama in his sleep. If you'll stay, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. She looked up at this rough man with his storm-gray eyes and work-worn hands. At the home, they'd begun building together in stolen moments between chores, at the future stretching out like the Montana horizon. She thought about Tommy sleeping down the hall with his broken arm, about how he'd smiled when she promised not to leave. Yes, she said, I'll stay. Daniel pulled her close, his arms solid around her, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Margaret felt like she'd come home. The rain hammered against the roof, thunder rumbled in the distance, but inside it was warm and safe. When he kissed her, it was gentle and promise-filled, tasting like coffee and hope. From the back room, Tommy's small voice drifted out, already half asleep again. Mama, you still there? Margaret pulled away from Daniel, meeting his eyes. He nodded, and she went to Tommy's bedside, settling in the chair beside him. The boy's eyes were barely open, but he reached for her hand with his good one. I'm here, she said softly. I'm not going anywhere. Pa said yes, Tommy mumbled. He did. Good, his eyes closed. I knew he would, you're perfect. Margaret sat there in the dim light, holding the hand of a child who'd become hers in every way that mattered, listening to Daniel moving quietly in the kitchen. Outside, the storm raged on, but it no longer felt like something to fear, just weather passing through. And when morning came, they'd face it together, all three of them, building their imperfect, beautiful life one day at a time. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as frontier dawn, but Margaret Winters wasn't afraid anymore. She'd found what she'd been searching for in the most unexpected way, not acceptance or security, though those would come. She'd found purpose. She'd found love. She'd found home.